So we built this ConOps architecture agnostic, so it's kind of plug and play. This is really to define, if you read the Cloud SRG, how many people read the Cloud SRG? All right, we've got about 10 liars. So the Cloud SRG, within their Chapter 6, talks to the Cloud Cyber Defense, and in there it tells you to go to the ConOps to get more definition. The ConOps is what we developed on that back end to define the C2 and C3 structure for how we were going to actually operate within this space. All right, so with this, we had a couple, I say a couple, there was about 5 different competing things happening at the same time. One, the joint pub got rewritten. The joint pub, if you don't know, joint pub 1-03, 3-12 defines all the terminology that we use within DoD. They got rid of the term computer network defense, CND. The 8530 was going through a rewrite and about to be put on the street. It actually is on the street now today. So those 2 competing pieces gave us some movement in how we were going to actually term and put the terminology out there for this within this ConOps. So up there you see what was in the old 6510, what's the new term in the 8530, and then what's in the old ConOps. So if you read the initial ConOps that we went out with, this was before some of those changes had occurred, and then now you see what the new ConOps has inside of that document based on all the changes that have occurred within DoD. This is just to kind of level set everything so that you understand what we're talking about. Now with the 8530 and the release of the new 8530, they got rid of the old CNDSP tier structure, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. That's outdated terminology now. So we've changed that into some of the roles that are played within there. So you've got a boundary cyber defense, mission cyber defense, a DoD cyber defense for this effort, and then you've got mission owners and cloud service providers. You can certainly ask questions along the way if you've got them. You don't have to wait till the end. This is more of a conversation than it is really a little PowerPoint slideshow here. All right, so I took some high-level pieces for what each one of these do. There is a lot of detail inside the ConOps for all the roles and responsibilities that they're responsible for. These are just very high-level pieces. If you do download the PowerPoint, if you look in the notes section, I put in there details about every role and responsibility that's defined in the ConOps, so you can read through those. But these are the high-level ones. And just to understand how we started and where we ended up, there is a DoD cyber defense. That's really like the JFH2 DoD, sitting at the very top, correlating everything that comes across the DoD and understanding where to fight the next battle and what the real fight is about. They grab information from the boundary cyber defense, who's there to protect the DoD. So this is if you think of traditional networking, this is at your IAP level, but this is really for the CAP. So what happened along the way as we were developing this was all of a sudden we had 2 different entities running the CAP. The idea is at the end of this, even in Halverson's memo, it says at the end we'll have one enterprise CAP that'll be run by DISA. In the meantime, SPAWAR has a CAP out there. It's running really well, and DISA has a CAP out there. So we've got 2 different boundary cyber defense personnel. This would carry on no matter what. So actually, it was kind of serendipitous because we hadn't at that time really thought about the fact that there's DREN, there's SDREN, there's other networks. So there's going to be different boundary defenders out there besides just DISA anyway. So this really actually worked for our benefit. So we ended up developing the DoD cyber defense, and again, that's like a JFH2 DoD, and then the boundary cyber defense. At the end of the day, for commercial cloud on NIPR, SIPR type connections, that would be DISA. Form that at the end of the day. But right now, there's 2. Mission cyber defense. So if you had the old terminology, or know the old terminology, CNDSP, or the new terminology, CDSP, Cyber Defense Service Provider, this is what the mission cyber defense does. So they're in charge of making sure that those applications, this really changed their focus to not try to do everything for everybody and try to see everything at the high layer, at the IAPs, and at the CAPs. This is really to focus their efforts on defending the applications that are sitting behind their enclaves. So that was the real push for that mission cyber defense, was really lay out those roles and responsibilities, define those efforts, and make sure that everybody understood where they were supposed to go. The mission owner. So the mission owner has always, this would be your old tier 3. The mission owners have always had a responsibility, and they're accountable to ensure that cyber defense gets performed for their applications and hosts, that they've got somebody that's aligned to them, or that they align to somebody that will provide those defenses. And in some cases, that may be themselves. So, cloud service provider, that's the commercial entities that we're talking about. This also would include MilCloud, so we included that piece in here, so you won't see a differentiation between MilCloud and commercial cloud. It was all tied together. All right, so the C2 model and the C3 model, I say those loosely. So what we did is we defined the command and control piece of it, which still remains for DoD. It remains JFHP DoD. This is where the commercial providers really struggle, right? So they don't have this kind of chain of command functionality that they have to perform and report to and drive things upwards, other than when they're supposed to report to DHS, which as we found out doesn't happen as frequently as we thought. So cloud service providers have a dual responsibility. The commercial cloud service providers have a dual responsibility to report everything to U.S. CERT. Any events, so not just incidents, but any events that occur that may affect their hosting applications need to be reported to U.S. CERT. They are also responsible, of course, because they're contracted out, responsible back to the mission owner. When the mission owner signs up for cloud services on their POC list for any kind of incident handling, that would include the MCD, who that MCD is, and that POC information there. And that enables the cloud service provider to work directly with the MCD to perform those functions for incident handling. All right? The C3 model is all about information sharing. So when you see C2, that's directive in nature. That tells somebody, when I tell you to do X, you will perform X. And if you can't, then you will tell me why you cannot perform those functions. The C3 model is more about the information sharing. So when something happens, it's not just about reporting it back up to the person that told you had to report it up to. It's also sharing the information across the community to make sure that we understand when something occurs at a lower level, we can make those calls as to whether or not it really occurred only at that level or if it occurred across the enterprise or the cloud. This is usually where the commercial companies get stuck. Is everybody clear? All right, so this is pulled straight out of the SRG. This is to show you what the mission owner responsibilities are, where they take the risk, and where the CSP takes risk for each one of the different types of cloud service offerings. Different than the traditional way we do things on the DoDN. This adds layers of complexity for us as to what we perform and when we perform it. In traditional sense, we do it all, right? So we do all the detect, response, even sustaining some of our equipment. In these environments, this really threw a complex nature into how we, DoD, usually perform cyber defense. But this is just to show you that we took every one of those into account as we developed that ConOps. We took infrastructure as a service, and this is how we looked at it as to who is responsible for what. So you can understand as we wrote the ConOps why we said when a CSP is responsible for their infrastructure and reporting any outages, why that's important to us. And likewise, if you're a mission owner and you have some kind of incident that you've discovered on your network or on one of your systems, that you report that up and that you have the responsibility for that. But this is where the risk really takes place for each one of those different entities. And again, you can find that in the SRG. This is a straight lift out of the SRG. This too is a straight lift out of the SRG. So not only do we have the different types, but now we got different levels. So you've got the level 2 piece that, it's the public information. And I got to be honest, when they first came to me and they said, hey, for public, what do you need to defend? And I said, nothing, defend the guy that's telling them that it's public. That's where my risk is. So I'm a lot of looking at misclassification or announcing something that's public. All of a sudden you find the general's calendar out there in the wild, those types of things that we're constantly worried about. That's usually on the mission owner that's provided that information. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing that's going to tell us if this calendar shouldn't be out there. So it's hard to defend against it. But as we started really looking at this really became an issue for us as to what it is we really needed to do. and when we needed to perform those functions. So as of right now, if you're talking level 2, off-prem means commercial company performing that CSP functionality. Off-prem, we would just need to perform the incident handling. So reporting things into the Joint Incident Management System, JIMS, within the DoD. So that's where we kind of focus in on. Off-prem for level 4 and 5. So again, this is going with a commercial company outside of the DoD. This is where this is the lift that we did for that aspect, and we made sure that we accounted for all the different level 4 and 5 pieces of that commercial connection. And then we've got the on-prem. This is when on-prem, we're talking MilCloud. So as we went through the MilCloud pieces, what aspects would we need to actually defend and define for each one of the different roles that are associated to doing cyber defense? All right. So now this is the meat and potatoes of the whole brief. So how does this really work? Words are great. I'm sure you've all read this and kind of scratched your head and got confused and sometimes, like I did, went to bed at night thinking, I don't know how this is actually going to work. So these are the different roles that we just defined out there, right? So you can see where they kind of sit. And I took this out of the previous brief, so it kind of lines up, right? All right, so if a compromise occurs today, with the architecture that's in place, we defenders can't see that connection as it's coming through. We really are relying on the mission owner score, CSP, to tell us that, hey, something has happened at this point, and then we need to perform the incident handling, right? So this is a concept of how that would happen if that were the case. So I took into account that right now we defenders can't see the traffic north-south coming at us. So the mission owner has identified that there was a compromise. They report that information two ways. So they report it up to their MCD. They're responsible to do that. That's part of what's defined in the ConOps. They have to report it to the MCD that there was a possible incident. And then they also provide information down to the CSP. The reason it's laid out this way is because if you're talking SaaS, it's a little bit different than if you're talking IaaS, right? So IaaS, the CSP is responsible for the infrastructure. So what happens on your application really isn't, for the most part, isn't their concern. They're going to tell you to patch your system. They may help you for an extra, buck or two. So, but that said, they're going to look at it still from their infrastructure piece, and it's just more informational for them, so that if another customer calls and identifies the same kind of situation, that they can let them know that, hey, this is already being reported into the DoD by this customer here. But again, the reporting structure, it has to go to the MCD. This is part of that information sharing. All right, the CSP, because remember, they had to, when the mission owner came online, they took the POC information for the MCD and tied that to the CSP. The CSP would also notify the MCD, not put a ticket in because it's not their issue yet. They would just notify the MCD that, hey, you have a customer out here. They reported something to us. We're just making sure that you have awareness of that and that you're working that issue. All right, so let's say it is not the CSP's problem. That's the way this structure is working right now. So the MCD, Mission Cyber Defender, would take the information and they report it into our database within DoD, which is called the Joint Incident Management System, right, JIMS. Once they report it into JIMS, we say information sharing. This isn't a pick up the phone. This isn't shoot an email. This is you put it into the database, and the BCDs and the JFHQ DODN as well, at the DCD level, they have access into that database. So they're monitoring that database to see what is occurring, when it's occurring, who it's occurred with, all those types of information. So they report it into JIMS. Initially, for the boundary cyber defense, it's just information that, hey, you've got that one of the customers out there that falls under one of the MCDs, they have a problem. We don't know what that is yet, but they're investigating. The DCD automatically gets that feed, so the MCD is responsible to report that up to the DCD. So in the meantime, the BCD is going to evaluate that information to understand, is this something we don't do today very well anyway. So they're going to evaluate the information across all the MCDs to say, hey, we saw this from a customer that's sitting on one of the cloud service providers, it's like AWS or even Microsoft, that they're sitting on one of those cloud service providers. Is this really contained to one, just that customer, two, just that cloud service provider, or is this a wider spread issue that we're having across the DODN? So they're going to look at that information, they're going to evaluate that. This takes some time, but they're going to evaluate that information across those boundaries to understand not only what was seen, but really kind of look at what else wasn't seen. So if the other service providers aren't reporting this, why? Right? If the other cloud service providers that really should be affected by this aren't reporting this, why? So is nobody watching the wire? Do we have another issue down there, a training issue, those types of things? So that is what the BCD is going to start evaluating using some of the capabilities that we're putting in place. So the BCD, in this case, the BCD found that, hey, this is wider spread than just that one MCD. We're going to take that ticket and roll it up, and we're going to take control of that. We're going to report into the DCD that, hey, while one customer reported this, we have multiple MCDs that are being affected by this situation. Multiple customers are being affected by this situation. So that gets reported into JFHQ Doden. Now remember, the BCD, if you go back to the C2 structure, the BCD doesn't have directive authority over the MCDs. So they can't tell them you're going to do X, right? They have to wait for JFHQ Doden to make the call. So the DCD is going to initially send something over to US Search saying, hey, this is a problem that we're having across the cloud, so we saw it on an IaaS system, but this may also be affecting some of your SaaS and some of your past customers. You need to put that information out to the CSPs to let them know that, hey, this is what's happening out there. This is what we're seeing on the DoD side of the fence, and you need to investigate. At the same time, the DCD will direct the BCD to take control of the ticket and close out everything else that's been put in place, even if there were 2, 3, 4 other tickets that were put in place by other MCDs. And they'll direct the MCDs to begin their investigation and report that information back to the Boundary Cyber Defender so that they have control of the whole situation and looking over the entirety of the Doden, make sure everything is fixed as it goes through. Right. The BCDs would take all the information again and they would plug it into GIMS as they get notified of how it's occurring. And then the MCDs, again, this is not a pick up the phone, hey, NCDoc, hey, DISA, we've got a problem out there. This is really just putting it into the database, and the database is doing the work for you. The MCDs are monitoring those databases, and they should be looking in there to say, hey, this ticket's being closed, it's being wrapped up and put into a new ticket. That ticket number is now X. And as they do the investigation and the incident handling that they're responsible for, they would put that information into that ticket instead of the other one. They would close out their old previous ticket. All right, and then the MCD would take that information, they would drive down to the mission owners and tell them, hey, you're responsible to provide me X logs, X data, X information, and provide that back to me. And they may be going to more than one mission owner at this point to say, even the ones that didn't report that probably should have reported it as directed in that new GIMS ticket, they would be grabbing that information as well to understand why those mission owners didn't see that to begin with, and how to handle those situations. That's it. Compromise is solved, right? It's that easy. It really is that easy. So that's really the meat and potatoes of how it happens. To close it out, after compromise is closed, they would report it back to the MCDs, who then would close their piece out in the ticket to let them know that, hey, in GIMS, we're done with our piece. This is the information we have. We're closing. We've remediated, whatever. And then the BCD would then close the entirety of the ticket out in GIMS and report back to the Doden Cyber Defense that it was actually closed and everything is resolved. This happens in a 24-hour period. I've seen if you're awake. That's it. Right? It's taking it through a fire hose. So, but that's really what the meat and potatoes of that ConOps is all about. So it was really grabbing the information, understanding that there is no tier structure involved anymore. There's a whole bunch of different roles, which theoretically, even before we got rid of the tier structure, there were already those roles in place. They were just never defined, and we never told them what exactly they had to do in those roles, especially at the higher layer for the Doden Cyber Defense and certainly for the Boundary Cyber Defense. We never told them exactly what it was they had to do. Now we're telling them, hey, this is your role, this is your responsibility. Stop trying to solve the problem down at the host. If you're up at the higher layer, start solving the problem for Doden and looking across the board. All right, so where are we at with the ConOps, right? So we've done different levels of review along the way. We've done AO level reviews. We had a small tabletop exercise within DISA, knowing that we had literally a hand in every one of those roles, depending on where we sat. So we had a DISA internal tabletop exercise to make sure we understood and we agreed that, hey, these whether we can do it or not wasn't the question. The question was, is this the right role? Is this the right function that this role should perform? And then build the architecture to that capability, which is really the right way to do the architecture, right? So we usually do it backwards. We build something and then they ask us, hey, how are you going to defend it, right? Which is awesome. So I love those conversations. But we did the internal review, we handed that back over, and now you're seeing the evolution of like an SCCA that's coming out of this to say, okay, this is what they need to perform, this is what they need to see, these are the capabilities they have to have at every one of those different layers. How are they going to get visibility to that information so that we can help automate that information instead of trying to have some guy look at 2, 3, 4, 20 different monitors to make that happen. So that's how we built it back the right way. So we adjudicated those comments. That was back in August and September. And then we went out and we prepped for a full-blown tabletop exercise where there's a lot of familiar faces in here that attended that. So we had a bunch of commercial companies come in. We had, across the DoD, we had everybody represented from Cybercom to JFHB Doden, all the way down to a lot of the mission owners that are really trying to figure out, how do I do this cloud thing? I'm getting pushed from my CIO to make this happen. How does this work? We had it down to that level. Once we completed that, we went to what we call the Cybersecurity Engineering Review Group. That's up at the Pentagon under Mr. Hale and Mr. Halverson. So we briefed them on where we were at, and after we got concurrence from there, it is going through the final review. So we have had a hiccup in the final review piece of it, where it has to go back through Cybercom one more time before we can release it. But it is literally on the verge of being released within the next couple of weeks, I would say. And that's where we're at with the ConOps itself. All right, so I know this was about cloud, but where are we going from here, right? So that's great that we did all this with the cloud stuff. So now I've got this one-off solution that doesn't match anything else that I do, which is awesome and what I look for. But in the meantime, what we did is we took the next big thing. We started with cloud because it was eating our lunch, right? And there was a big question, and still is today, how do you actually do the cyber defense, right? How do you do this from an architecture standpoint? How do you do this even coordinating it? Because now you got this third-party entity that's commercial, that doesn't do DoD things, doesn't follow DoD instructions and all that kind of stuff and policy. So how do you make that happen? How do you make that work and correlate all that? So we started with the cloud. It was easier because, quite honestly, it was in its infancy. And now we're tackling JRSS, which is obviously not in its infancy, but there's probably about 50 different versions of how you do cyber defense out there for JRSS. We're pulling all that together, and now we're going to do the same thing we did with cloud. We're going to use the same terminology, the same roles, and build that out for JRSS as well. After that, we're going to go to, and we're in the process of doing that right now today. So actually, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have another meeting. So, and then after that, we're going to do what we call the Joint Cyber Def ConOps. This will become your 8530 manual. So if you follow the DoD instructions and manuals that are associated to them, even the instruction that's out there, the new instruction that just got put out on March 7th, that even refers to the old 2001 manual that was written for how do you do an inspection, not how do you perform cyber defense. So this ConOps will become the manual and the overarching, hey, this is how we do joint cyber defense ConOps across the board. Then we'll have appendices, one for JRSS, one for cloud, and then later on, obviously, we see JIE out there in the future. And anything else that comes around. We know there's going to be other appendices that maybe people think are a little bit different, and we need to address those. Mobility is one that everybody scratches their head. How do you defend mobility, right? So we may have other appendices as well. So if you have any recommendations for those, or certainly where the commercial community is coming in, scratching their head, saying, I don't know how you're doing this, those are candidates for follow-ons after we get through with JIE. All right. I'm open for questions, because that's short and sweet, to the point. This slide.
So what is the relationship between your JIE defensive, I forgot what CyDef, cyber defensive ConOps, and the JIE ops ConOps? Thank you.
Yeah, well, so the JIE ops ConOps, so there's a NetOps ConOps, right, which kind of overarching for DoD, and then there's the C&D piece of this. So the two worlds have never met before. I mean, we need, both pieces need to be alive and live and function, but the reporting chains, all that is not in sync, right? It does not go through. The cyber defense piece always happened to go through, in the DoD world, the J6 staff or the IA staff that would perform those functions. The NetOps world would point through their J3 shop, which is their operations department, to say, hey, I want something out there right now. I don't care how it is. I don't care how it's defended. I need this to make my warfighter better. And they are in it for the operational piece. Now you can understand from an engineering point of view that a lot of times operations and defense, they don't meet eye to eye. This is certainly one of those cases where we separated them out for a reason, and I think they do live in their own different worlds. They do tie together. They have to tie together, but that's backed up. If I can go back one sec. Bad part about build slide. So where that gets tied together is on this chart here. So when you go back up to that C2 model with JFHQ Doden, above them is Cybercom, right? That really has that overarching piece of it, and above them even is Stratcom, right? So Stratcom really has that ops side of the world. That's how it ties back in. So as defense is happening and we're saying, hey, yeah, you can do this, but this is the risk you're going to take to do that, and we're not going to be able to defend it, or we'd have to change how we do things to make that work. It gets reported up through those chains to Stratcom that would then drive down as to whether this is really truly the operation that we want to perform, or even the combatant commanders can make that call as to what they want to do in their geographical area, understanding the risk. So we've separated the two. Risk and operations don't always meet eye to eye. So we've kept them apart at this time. There has been a push in the past to try to tie the two together. It doesn't, I can tell you right now from experience, it hasn't worked in the past, so we'll see. Somebody out in the crowd thought that was fun. All right, any other questions? This is like taking it through a fire hose, so I mean, if you're confused, scratching your heads, you think we got it wrong, this is a living, breathing document. That's why we built it as a ConOps and not as an instruction and not as a manual, so that we can change this over time. As things matured, we know we don't have an architecture back there right now that can perform all the functions that we have to do to perform this. So as that architecture comes out, that may change some of the roles and responsibilities, and certainly some of the automational pieces of this that would help us do this a little bit easier, faster, smarter, more effectively. So this is a living document. So as you guys are bringing in capabilities, understand what this document does and how it really affects that. And if it's going to break this model, that's okay. We just need to understand how that happens and what we need to do to change the model to now match the new capability, right? And that's how it should be. So that's why we built it as a ConOps and not as an actual manual or instruction to begin with, so they could live and breathe.
Is there a feeling that the 24-hour response time is adequate, and is there plans to improve that? And also, is there an IPS part of this model that will be implemented?
An IPS part?
Preventative.
What?
A preventative for incidents instead of just detection.
Yeah, okay. So an IPS is included in some of the architecture pieces that we've seen before, so I'll answer backwards kind of. The first question escapes me. Oh, the 24-hour time limit. So is that adequate? I want more, but we only have 24 hours in a day, right? So 24 hours, I think, just because we live, so DoD doesn't stop operating, and honestly, the attackers don't stop because it was 5 o'clock in the Pacific, and now they know that they can't attack them anymore because they're off duty and they wouldn't give them fun. So now we'll go into CONUS. It doesn't work like that. So I think 24 hours is the right answer. How we do that and how we execute that may change into some other form-fit model. But 24-hour coverage and incident handling, I think, it's an absolute. It has to happen that way. They don't take days off. They don't take holidays off. Besides their summer break from school, we see a dip. But other than that, they don't really take any time off. So we got to accommodate for that. Does that answer? Any other questions? You guys are too easy or too tired or just want your CPUs, one or two?
My question is related to who's going to be using these ConOps. I'm assuming that it's the CDSPs.
So who uses the ConOps? Joint Force Headquarters Code.
Okay.
Cybercom will need a copy of it. Actually, that's why I went back through for one more look by Cybercom, just to make sure they understood what the structure looks like, who they're going to get information from, who they're not going to get information from, and where they need to tap in if there's some kind of national crisis, right? So Cybercom has to have, they're a player in this. While they're not named up there, they are a player. JFHQ Doden, of course, because they got the C2 structure, they will be using this as the way to direct cyber forces. Certainly the boundary cyber defenders out there today, that's DISA and SPAWAR. There may be others, there may be less. At the end of the day, it will probably be one. And the 23, we've got 23 mission cyber defense or CDSPs sitting out there today that would be using this. And the mission owners need to as well. Because what else is in the ConOps that you don't necessarily see on these slides is definitions of what you need to have in your SLAs and your contracts to make sure that they understand, hey, you've got to have an incident handling procedure. You've got to have a way to contact that MCD. You've got to have a way to let us know when there's a spillage, when there's some kind of classification issue. If you have an outage, we ran through one of the scenarios we ran through in the tabletop was, if you have an outage that affects our operations, how does that get notified, right? So, and how do I know that that outage was intentional versus, hey, you got some kind of denial of service going on? So those types of notifications are pretty critical so that we don't spin and start fighting something that really isn't there. So all those players, I'd say everybody that's involved in this thing from top to bottom needs to have a copy of this, even on the operational side, so that they can understand when they make a change across Doden that includes part of the cloud now, right? So how does that affect their operations? So if I want to put in a cybercon condition, right, some cyber condition out there that's going to affect how I have to have all my system administrators redo all their passwords, that affects everybody in the cloud. To include the CSPs, right? So does that affect the CSPs? They got to make that call. So they got to know that piece too. So it goes beyond just the cyber defenders having to know it. It's also on the operational side. That's why we sent it through that high-level review to make sure that we hadn't missed something or broken something that they would need to know that we didn't address. We took it from, we took it from a tunnel vision of, we want to defend the networks, this is how we do it. But we didn't take that operational piece in mind as we built that out until the very end. So we just wanted to make sure we had it right. That's why it's going through that other piece of review. Does that make sense? All right. Well, I guess that's it. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody for coming, and don't forget to get your CPEs. Have a good day.